Good afternoon to those of you in New York, and good morning or good evening to those of you elsewhere. Welcome to the Finance and Funding Roundtable of Aid and Trade at the World Humanitarian Forum. My name is Barry Kolodkin. I'm the Deputy Chief Evaluator at the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, perhaps better known as EBRD, in London. It's a multilateral development bank, and it's the largest private sector investor in Eastern Europe. I'll serve as your moderator today, and I won't speak much about EBRD. I hope you had the opportunity earlier to listen to our acting president speak in the SDG during COVID-19 session. In this session about finance, we'll discuss the role of, needs for, partnerships, challenges raising, and practices to attract finance for development. Some of the themes might include mobilization of or crowding in the private sector, innovation, and attracting finance beyond COVID-19 relief in today's environment. My colleagues on the panel have also mentioned they see finance as a tool to build resilience. I encourage the panelists to riff on those and other themes as they see fit. I'd like to briefly introduce our excellent panelists who I'm so glad came today without giving their full biographies, and then give each of them 3 minutes to talk more about themselves, their organizations, and the work they do. I'll then follow up with a question or two for each, and then we'll invite questions from the audience. Our panel today, in alphabetical order, is Tom Adlam. He's the team leader of DFID's Impact Program for Palladium. Lauren Bell, she's the operations lead at the Western Union Foundation. Ramya Gopalan, she's the Global Innovation Coordinator and Alternative Financing Lead for the International Federation of the Red Cross. Bilal Khanzada, the head of the Cash Transfer Program Operations at Save the Children International. Jessica Stanford, Country Director for the Philippines of Build Change, a Housing for the Poor-oriented organization. And hopefully we'll be joined by Nicholas Pascal, Director of Blue Finance, a Blue Economy Ocean Conservation Consultancy. Tom, why don't you start us off and tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, etc.
Yes, thank you very much, Barry. First of all, I'm delighted to be here on behalf of Palladium and the Impact Program. So I'm the team leader for the Impact Program, which is a long-standing UK aid program, which is designed to support the impact investing sector. It's managed by Palladium. I'm employed by Palladium. And Palladium is, for those of you that don't know it, an international development consultancy, which really specializes in positive impact and the creation of long-lasting social and economic value. So the Impact Program, the overall goal of the program is to drive a sustainable improvement in the quality of life for people who are living in poverty, specifically focusing on Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And the way it does this is by looking to support, looking at the way in which the private sector delivers affordable goods and services, employment, markets, and how that is financed, so via impact investment. What we do is we support initiatives which provide solutions to the barriers which limit the flow of capital within and towards those markets. So what we're looking to do is to, by supporting the impact investing ecosystem as a whole, catalyze a significant increase in the volume of capital which is flowing towards Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. What we're also trying to do is to try to find ways of improving the distribution of that investment, of that capital. And by distribution, I mean either by geography, by sector, or by type of business. And obviously the strategy there is to make sure that we do what we can to support the impact investing sector to ensure that fewer people are left behind. And my own background, before joining Palladium, has been in investing in the agriculture sector in East and Southern Africa. So I lived in East Africa, both East and Southern Africa for many years. And during that time, particularly focused on providing access to finance for small growing businesses. So I've seen firsthand how the kinds of positive changes in terms of livelihoods and opportunity, what kind of a catalyst the private sector can be, particularly in rural areas. Thank you. You're mute, Barry. Barry, you're mute.
You're still on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. Anyway, Lauren, please tell us about your work and what you do at Western Union Foundation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Barry. Hi, I'm Lauren Bell. I lead operations at the Western Union Foundation. I focus on developing new partnerships and programs that are aligned with our philanthropic vision. I've also established some new fundraising sources for the foundation, so I'm happy to discuss those as well. Prior to joining the foundation, I led global marketing for the B2B or business payments division of Western Union. And I'll tell you, one of the things I love most about working within the Western Union umbrella of organizations is just that Western Union is such a purpose-driven and impact-oriented organization. It's just got such a culture of impact. At Western Union's core is this idea of moving money for better. And really the for better part is the important part of the work that we do, right? So out of that ethos, the Western Union Foundation was created back in 2001 with the philanthropic vision of giving back to the communities where Western Union customers and employees live and work. And really over the years, we've refined our mission to align even more with Western Union's purpose to connect across borders and respond to social challenges in doing so, particularly those caused by forced migration. Our mission as the foundation then is to enable displaced and marginalized young adults to connect to the global economy through education and job skills training to give them equal access to opportunity. In fact, this time last year at UNGA, we announced our 3-year, $15 million commitment to provide nonprofits, and we call this commitment Opportunity Beyond Borders. So this Opportunity Beyond Borders commitment is to provide nonprofits with funding to reach the most marginalized individuals, particularly, like I said, migrants, refugees, forcibly displaced youth, to provide opportunity for them to not only survive, but to provide hope for the future via decent work opportunities.
Thank you, Laura. Now I'd like to turn to Ramya. Ramya, could you please introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about the work you do?
Sure, Barry, thanks a lot. Hi, everyone. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Ramya Gopalan, and I coordinate innovation and innovative financing globally for the IFRC. And I guess unlike most of my other global colleagues who are based in Geneva, I am fortunate enough to be based in beautiful Beirut. Still stays beautiful despite all the odds, especially recently. And I have to say, I mean, I'm happy the curators for the panel, Barry included, distinguishes between financing and funding because I think it's quite nuanced and important. Our work on innovative financing at the IFRC is positioned within our innovation and futures portfolio. So it really benefits on the one hand from our innovative design thinking, and on the other side, it's informed by our futures work, where we look at emerging issues, futuristic trends in terms of what the future of financing itself looks like. Of course, our fundamental aim to look at innovative financing and why it gains prominence is recognizing that the communities we work with, we need to achieve impact at scale. We need an unprecedented scale of operations. And we believe innovative financing is one way to take that forward and really leverage more traditional development financing. So besides collaborating with a lot of new and amazing partners that we've had the fortune to work with, we of course explore new instruments in terms of how they might be appropriate for the different issues that we work on. But more importantly, our focus is not simply on designing or structuring new instruments, but really looking at how we can collectively move the needle forward in terms of advancing the discussions on innovative financing, advocating for the kind of enabling ecosystem that is needed, as well as developing our own capacity in the space, recognizing that it is a new space. It is not what we're traditionally used to as as agencies that work in provide grant financing. So really also recognizing this and developing our own capacity in this space. So I'm really thrilled to be a part of this panel with all my great colleagues here. So thank you so much. Back to you, Barry.
Thank you, Ramya. And Jessica, tell us a little bit about your work with Build Change and yourself, please.
Yeah, hi. Hey, everybody. My name is Jessica Stanford. I'm the country director in the Philippines for Build Change. Build Change is a non-profit social enterprise. We work around the world, particularly in Indonesia, the Philippines, across Latin America, the Caribbean, Nepal, and elsewhere, looking at how to sort of look at the construction industry, so particularly the construction industry and environment around houses and schools, and how to get that entire ecosystem to work for homeowners, for local builders, for government officials, for engineers, to be able to save lives and reduce losses in the events of earthquakes and windstorms, and ultimately help low-income communities in these countries, as Lauren was saying before, not just survive, but thrive, in fact, so and not be impacted by these major events. So personally, I've been with Build Change about 4.5 years, initially on our post-earthquake reconstruction projects in Nepal, then looking at post-hurricane programming in the Caribbean, and currently looking at prevention programming and pre-disaster work in the Philippines. And all of these regions have different hazards, different threat levels, which are only increasing with climate change and other factors, let alone throwing in pandemics and other things. So we work, as I say, to build this construction ecosystem and make sure that it's accessible for those low-income households. And the main way that we do that is looking at bringing together money, technology, and people and policy. And those three sort of areas are all required to really successfully be able to build safe houses and allow homeowners to build their own safe house or strengthen the house they're already in. So I'm really excited today to be on this panel, looking specifically at financing, innovative financing, and for me, looking at housing financing. So how all of these different mechanisms and techniques can be used to really help homeowners get access to the financing they need to have a safe home. So thanks, Barry.
And Bilal, did I go out of order? Did I get you?
No, just now. So
please, Bilal Kamzada from Save the Children International, please.
yeah, thank you, Barry. So hi, everyone. My name is Bilal Khanzada. I'm the head of cash transfer program operations at Save the Children International, based here in London. Just a quick background. Prior to joining Save the Children, I was heading the development organization's portfolio for Standard Chartered Bank, which included multilateral, bilateral agencies, microfinance institutions, local and international charities. So coming from the on-ground experience of what actually works in humanitarian settings, and very nicely moving into an organization which secures the future, and that is the next generation, the children. Cash transfer programming, which is more commonly nowadays known as cash and voucher assistance, has been significantly increasing in use by not only charities, commercial entities, but also a significant part by donors because of the transformative benefits it brings in. It does include different ways of actually reaching out to the beneficiaries, and there is a textbook description for it. But the way I describe cash transfer programming is to reach the end beneficiary in the most dignified manner possible, whilst ensuring there's a proper audit trail. Why an audit trail? Because it's, I have mentioned this earlier, the grace period to the humanitarian or the charity sector is gone because of the penalties that the financial service providers have been paying for loose controls. The charity sector needs to up their game and show the evidence. And cash and voucher assistance is one area which reduces operation costs and then increases the visibility of the spend as well. It touches a number of thematic areas, and Save the Children has always been in the forefront of it. I'm very excited to be part of the panel discussion today and looking forward to finding new solutions and answering, hopefully, some questions that would be arising from the panels and other places as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Bilal. And now I want to ask the panelists a few questions, and then we'll leave time, for those watching and listening to ask questions as well. I'd like to start with Jessica. Jessica, several people mentioned the phrases ecosystem and the discussion of the private sector moving in. Can you talk about some of the work that your organization does in order to build the ecosystem? You build partnerships to improve finance, maybe some of the financial tools that are available to you, and maybe some of the work you do to innovate to help the government support this with policies and mobilize the private sector, hopefully in advance of disasters, not just after the disasters?
Yeah, sure. So I can talk about first maybe an example from the Philippines. What we do there is we've moved very much, transitioned over to this prevention programming. There's various sort of statistics or different reports, but the general sort of belief is that for every dollar that you spend in good disaster risk reduction and prevention programming, you save about $7 worth of cost in a post-disaster program. So it really makes economic sense to invest before disasters strike. And countries like the Philippines, which is ranked 3rd in the World Risk Index, I mean, they've got everything going on. There are earthquakes, typhoons, volcanic eruptions, and that was just in my 4 months, my first 4 months in the country, followed by a pandemic. So, I mean, it's really, these risks are real and they are happening again and again and affecting communities, not just in the Philippines, but around the world. So in the Philippines, one of the avenues that we started to work in was involving private finance, so involving microfinance institutions and rural banks that work already at a community level, have great client bases, great working relationships in their communities, and we work with them to help them strengthen their housing finance. So some of them already had housing finance products, but they were generally not taking into consideration the structural strength of the house, so how it would withstand a windstorm or an earthquake. They were more looking maybe at an important but less structural change like sanitation or kitchen. And so bringing in those products so that the microfinance lenders can understand and get technical assistance to provide a structural intervention that the homeowner and builder can implement themselves, and therefore make their house structurally stronger and understand why that would be sort of important for them. But also building on with those the opportunity, the microfinance industry reaches across across the country, has millions of clients, and most of the MFIs that we work with, over 80% of those clients are women. And we know that women and girls are disproportionately affected when events strike. So the fact that we can use this whole industry to mobilize funding into housing, and with it, the technical assistance, that's the element that we bring in helping them to craft these financial products that really help the low-income households. So that's one of the examples that we're doing in the Philippines. But I think there are other examples of mobilizing funding, which doesn't necessarily have to be the private sector. In Colombia, for example, we are working together with the government and supporting their Casa Digna, Vida Digna program, which is about having a dignified house, dignified life. And they're looking to support just this year 600,000 homeowners to renovate, improve, and now structurally strengthen potentially their houses. And they're doing that through a grant scheme, but bringing together that sort of policy shift and bringing the fact that you can structurally strengthen homes to the agenda, along with the financing, whether it's public financing or private financing, really helps to, as we said before, bring together this money, technology, and people, and get more and more people into safe houses. And there's many more ways to innovate. We would love to reach more into the insurance industries, into wholesale fund, to help these microfinance and rural banks really have the backing, especially in the post-COVID kind of economic situation, to have greater financial backing and international support to take their products and their sort of innovations to scale. So I think I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. Everybody's got such fascinating things to talk about. I could follow up with 1,000 questions, but I'll try to get to everyone. Bilal, I wanted to ask you, you had two of the phrases you talked about in your opening segment were the transformative benefits of cash and voucher assistance. And then you talked about things like audit trails and the charity sector upping its game in terms of what it has to do from a record-keeping point of view. Can you talk a little bit about how you work with the financial institutions and then the beneficiaries to overcome obstacles, if you will, to have the transformative side, yet give people the discipline they need to do these other things which maybe they haven't done before?
No, excellent question, Barry. Thank you. Like I said, cash has significantly, well, when I say cash, I mean cash transfer programming or cash and voucher assistance has significantly increased since 2015. It's close to around $4.6 billion. So that's a significant part of the humanitarian side. The constraint comes in is because of the penalties, like I mentioned. Financial service providers have decreased their risk appetite towards the charity sector because of these reasons as well. Because they do not classify a humanitarian transaction or a payment as separate, similar to microfinance institutions where a lender is not seeing a microcredit as a separate lending, they are seeing it as a lending. Similar for humanitarian payments as well, these are channeled and screened through the same panel as well. So there is no segregation for humanitarian payments. So that's a difficulty, last end, especially when it comes to the beneficiary that we are trying to reach, which is the most marginalized and deprived individuals, internally displaced people, who not necessarily carry, for example, identification documents. At Save the Children, like I said, they've been at the forefront of finding innovative solutions. At present, there is a collaborative work that is being done, which would be hopefully rolled out soon, by the name of Lotus 20. What that would be doing is not only just creating digital ID that gives comfort to financial service providers, but also creating the audit trail, end-to-end and host-to-host solution, so that the charities and donors can see every penny being spent for what purposes. Obviously, it will not totally eliminate the need of multi-purpose cash, meaning you hand over cash to somebody and they can choose what they want to do. A mother knows best what to buy for the child, for example. But surely the voucher side, you will create an audit trail where there will be more support towards the humanitarian side, whilst you're ensuring you're retaining data and not compromising on leaking of personal information about the beneficiaries. I hope that gives you some background. I can speak for hours, Barry, but like we know, we are limited on the timelines. I hope it gives you some background to this.
That's great, and I thank you all for keeping so well to the time. Maybe I could move to Tom, and we start talking a little bit about partnerships. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you about is innovating with partnerships. What do you bring that you learn in the field into your larger project because you have a large project? How do you maximize the role of local partners? And when I looked at some of the documentation about your project, I see that you're very involved in impact measurement. Being an evaluator, I'm always interested in impact measurement. So if I can ask you about a little bit about what the role of measurement is and how it improves your results, that would be very helpful.
Now my turn.
You're on mute, John.
My turn to clumsily unmute myself. Right. Okay. So, well, as you said, I mean, the impact program, and I'm not sure I made this particularly clear actually in my introduction, is a grant maker. What we look for is we look for partners who are able to do these things, and then support them with grant finance. In that regard, what we look for the most innovative ideas that to back. Not exclusively. We're also investing in longer term projects which are seeking to bring commonality of approach to the impact investing sector. I'd say we do a mixture of backing ideas which support the whole impact investing ecosystem, and then also supporting initiatives in certain specific areas where we feel there are particularly good ideas. I'll give you an example of that in a moment. But everything that we do is informed by wanting to identify the biggest barriers to investment, and then tackling those by adopting a portfolio approach to the grants that we make to make the market work more effectively. Now, specifically in the area of impact management and impact measurement, the reason why this is so important to the impact investing ecosystem is that I mean, to give you an analogy, everyone, well, not everybody, but most people involved in the investment business and most people involved in enterprise of any description knows that, you know, the way in which financial companies and businesses and not-for-profits present financial information is very standardized. One of the challenges for the impact investing industry is that there hasn't been anything like the same level of standardization in the way in which enterprises report their non-financial performance. And what we're seeking to do, and this is particularly important for impact investing because it's very sort of raison d'etre, is that it's investing for a return, but it's also investing with a specific impact goal in mind. So really, until you can start to talk about the value which is being delivered by impact on the ground, and whether you can measure that and disclose that, you're really relying on anecdote and feeling and sentiment and all of those other good things, but great things, but things that don't drive the development of a proper marketplace. So some of the grantees that we work with, our partners that we work with, organizations like the Impact Management Project, organizations like the Global Impact Investing Network, are seeking to drive commonality in the way in which investors measure the impact that their partner, the companies that they invest in have, how they report on that, how they disclose that to their stakeholders. And this is a large part of the work. This is a significant part of the strategy of the impact program. Drive commonality, drive harmonization in the approach to management, measurement, and reporting, and you create a market which institutional investors are able to rely on the information that they are being provided with. So, I mean, I'm not sure. It's difficult to. This is quite a abstruse subject in some ways, but the GIN, for example, the Global Impact Investing Network, has a very well developed platform called IRIS Plus, and what IRIS Plus does is it looks at the relevant sort of SDG value chain, and it develops standardized measures and indicators and reporting guidelines for companies and then for investors who are supporting that. So the logic goes that by developing those standard metrics and standard disclosure approaches, we will be able to encourage and motivate and attract many more institutional investors towards providing capital to impact investing intermediaries. I hope that answers the question, Barry.
It does, and thank you. I have a million follow-up questions, but maybe we will have a little time at the end. I'd like to ask Lauren, since we talked a little bit about partnership, and you mentioned some of the programs in your introduction, we've seen that Western Union Foundation has provided $125 million in funds to more than 2,000 NGOs in over 175 countries. Can you talk to us about your process for finding and sourcing partners, both on the funding side and on the implementation side? And what are some of your keys to success for being able to be so global and widespread like that?
Sure, absolutely. And those figures, by the way, are from the inception of the foundation, right? So since 2001, that's the investment that we've made over the past sort of 20 years. And, you know, like Tom, we're a grant making organization. So that's the heart to what we do is A, finding those partners, and B, you know, the impact measurement is always top of mind. So I think we could have some really interesting conversations on that front, Tom. But in terms of just finding who to partner with, you know, we're a small but mighty team here at the Western Union Foundation. We really leverage our internal knowledge and expertise in terms of finding partners, but we also rely on the global network of Western Union. So we make sure that we're tapping into the folks on the ground in the countries that we're looking to provide support to make sure we're really connecting with the right partners. If there are grassroots or smaller organizations that wouldn't have hit our radar otherwise. Our team, for context, is all based in the US, but we do fund programs around the world, and we have a priority list of 25 countries where we focus the majority of our investment. So it's really important for us to not think myopically in terms of we're in the US trying to find US programs that are funding locally, but actually that we're finding those local programs as well. We also engage with peer collaboratives, such as the Tent Partnership for Refugees in our space, or CSR boards, and regional organizations local to Denver, such as Be Civic or the Denver Funders Forum, to help network and grow our network of nonprofits, as well as find opportunities for co-funding and partnerships. So making sure that we're teaming up with other foundations to make more of an impact than we could have independently. And then in terms of what success looks like, you know, so relevant to the conversation on impact measurement. And I think we go into it thinking about what we want that outcome to look like, and we're trying to move away from measuring by outputs, as Tom said, but really what's the genuine difference or change that we want to help to make. In terms of what we look for in our partners, it's really demonstrating that contextual expertise and helping to educate us in the process along the way. So the strength of our local partners is really helping us to understand where our funds are best placed, helping to educate us in terms of making sure that we're investing the right way and not coming at it from a sort of top-down approach of pushing our funding in an area that we think is best because we're not the local experts on the ground. We also look for evidence of feasibility, especially if we're funding those new programs or innovative ideas. And we always prioritize lasting impact. So we want to make sure that we're not just there for a day, that we're making change that has longer legs. And then finally, just quickly, we also look for ways to go beyond a grant. So even as a corporate foundation with a strength in grant making, we see how we can engage the Western Union network to make sure we're again adding those value add services, connecting partners. So where we sort of play in the space of enabling refugees and migrants, specifically with workforce skills, is a pretty niche area, right? So we try to connect partners around the world who may otherwise not be speaking to share best practices and really improve their programs in different sort of corners of the globe. And in pockets, we also invest in research to make sure that we're making informed decisions in terms of the programs that we're funding really being the most impactful locally.
Thank you. I like the phrase "lasting impact." I think that's something we're all trying to look at. Oh, Nicola has joined us. Let me ask Ramya a question, and then I'll come back to Nicola. Ramya, when we had chatted earlier, you talked about donors, investors being risk averse, and you're trying to use these innovative models to finance development. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the legal framework impediments, confusions in the marketplace that investors and donors face, because we want to be able to increase their risk appetite. And if you can, you were actually in Beirut at the time of the explosions, so you're someone who can tell us just a few weeks ago about the environment for humanitarian assistance right after the disaster and how you work with these people to help. That would be very, very interesting to everybody.
Thank you, Barry. Great questions. And of course, it's always heartbreaking for me right now to talk about Beirut, but I will try my best. Let me maybe start with actually, explaining a little bit about the kind of projects we've been able to do, and then share some reflections from that to the questions you pose. So within IFRC and the membership of the national societies, we have quite a wide spectrum of models that we've been exploring. So across the membership, we have, for example, working on catastrophe bonds as an insurance product. We're also working on community inclusion currencies that are especially relevant in the current crisis because they fundamentally change how cash and voucher-based assistance is tied to livelihood and resilience programs. And then within IFRC, very recently, we launched the Anticipation Hub to advance our work on disaster risk financing through focus-based financing, which is a model that we really support and advance as a preventive mechanism. We've also been exploring Islamic financing, and while not necessarily new, I think in its application to the humanitarian development sector, there is a lot there that is definitely innovative and is an opportunity to see how it can be combined with more traditional financing. And finally, maybe one project, which is my pet project, if I may be allowed to pick favorites, is an outcome-based fund that we developed with the Islamic Development Bank that blends different types of grant capital to unlock private investment for a program called One Wash, which really combines water, sanitation, hygiene, and public health services for communities at risk from diseases like cholera, but also other pandemics as we're seeing right now. And I think especially with COVID, it's accentuated even more the gaps in the global south as it relates to water, sanitation, and hygiene, as well public health, given that even hand washing becomes a luxury in most cases. Through these different projects, I would say I think the conversation can be more about risk appetite as opposed to risk averseness. Considering that we're working with a number of different partners, whether they be donors who are more used to linear grant giving, whether they be fixed income investors, whether they be larger impact investment funds. And I think it's important that we recognize that the risk measurement for each of these stakeholders is different. The return on investment is different. The business case is different. We have seen an overwhelming engagement from the private sector with the current crisis, not just from an altruistic sense, but also because it makes business sense, because this is a crisis which is not just humanitarian, but largely economic as well. And I would maybe, if I can pick, I can talk all day on this, but if I had to pick three reflections, let's say, that respond to some of these challenges with regards to risk appetite and so on, is one, there's been a lot of interest, policy change, strategy that's been developed across the board amongst various partners to encourage innovative financing. But still what remains is the legal framework to put instruments into practice. The legal instruments, both in terms of us, like as an implementing agency, but also on the side of a funding agency, which is not necessarily possible and not necessarily quick, especially when we're looking at, for example, outcome-based financing mechanisms. A second, I would say, as a reflection, is much needed investment in capacity. As with most things innovative, it takes a lot of time. It is we're dealing with a whole suite of sophisticated instruments. It takes time, it takes patience. We're stepping out of our comfort zone. And we need to recognize that this means there needs to be an investment in capacity to understand and advance these instruments, because that capacity also informs risk appetite from those who are not traditionally used to it. And then the last one I would say, which I think more than a reflection is a plea, is that we see often partners, of course we have thematic priorities, we have country priorities, but I think we really require, and I can think of maybe one or two donors or one or two foundations that are doing this, but we really need investment in financial product innovation that can be agnostic to the issues, but still scalable, right? And I think, again, as most things innovative, we need a sandbox environment. We need the resources to make it happen. We can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater to say, okay, this instrument worked in this instance, this didn't, because it's still a very, very new space. So as much as the conversations are happening, and this is one such panel, I think, there really needs to be that flexibility and that investment to encourage financial product innovation, not just thematic priorities. So I think these are some of the takeaways. And with regards to Beirut, I have to say, again, as we see with COVID crisis or any humanitarian crisis, there is a huge rush on reactive financing. And of course, we're very thankful to partners. And of course, when it comes to humanitarian crisis, we don't always know what's about to hit. But it would be really interesting to see how much of that financing can be, help in influence the kind of policy changes that's needed, the system level changes that are needed, and that can be more preventive and not necessarily reactive, not necessarily short term, that allows for the quick gains, but really need to enable the longer term development impact that can be had. And that's something that's very true of what we're seeing right now in Beirut. And I can only hope, because this is home now for me, that this is made possible because this one blast is not just about the immediate impact, but the impact is going to be felt for years to come, because the neighborhood that got hit is not just the cultural heart of Beirut, but also the economic heart of Beirut. So recovery is that much harder, plus given the COVID crisis and the longer standing economic crisis of Lebanon. So I hope that that helps answer all the questions that you had. And sorry if I took too much time.
It was a big question, and you gave us a lot to think about. And obviously, we're all hopeful for, well, it won't be easy, but the most expeditious reconstruction and aid to Beirut possible. Nicolas Pascal from Blue Finance has joined us. He's a director at Blue Finance, which is a blue economy and maritime conservation consultancy. Nicolas, do you want to take about 3 minutes or so and talk to us about your organization, yourself, what the work Blue Finance does?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for the invite and having the possibility to participate in this session. So very briefly, Blue Finance is a non-profit company, social enterprise we have one specific mandate, which is really to develop solutions, impact investment solutions, and blended finance solutions for marine conservation, livelihood enhancement, and climate change. So we very much focus on one ecosystem and how improving the natural health of this ecosystem can benefit coastal communities and fishers, mainly depending on the natural resources. So basically, we are now in upscaling of proof of concept. We have demonstrated through a pilot approach that we can structure blended finance solutions for marine conservation, so specifically for marine protected areas. This was done in the Caribbean, and now we are upscaling it in the sub-Saharan Africa with one project supported by the impact program of the UK aid in Cape Verde and in Mozambique. So, yep, I will be very happy to share much more about this. So let's in a very nutshell, the approach relies on an innovative public and private partnership to co-manage the marine conservation areas between non-profit entities, local non-profit entities, and the government. We develop, as Blue Finance and with the local entities, sustainable revenues for these NGOs so they can manage and maintain the marine protected areas in the long term without depending from government and subsidies and grants. And what we do, once we have this revenue model more or less structured, we structure a blended finance solution, mixing grant, catalytic funding from development banks, and impact investment, which is very new for them. And I think we are one of the only one proposing impact investment is SDG 14 for marine conservation specifically.
Thank you, Nicolas. If I can follow up, one of the things we've been talking about is prevention and resilience. Can you explain to us, why marine conservation is so important, not only from the environmental perspective, but from the humanitarian and particularly the economic and financial perspective?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, this is something quite intuitive when you work there, so it's maybe important to remind it. Yeah. So obviously from the coastal areas from the sea, we depend on many ecosystem services. The first one and most intuitive one is really fish biomass. We need fish to eat and to as a subsistence means for many fishery communities. That's the first one. The second one is really also as what we call a scenic beauty. In many cases, in many of the sites where we are working, tourism and blue tourism is really important, both as an economic opportunity for many communities, but also as a means of creating jobs and employment for most of these people working in the tourism industry. I don't say that all tourism is good. We have to be careful here. Not all tourism is sustainable. Obviously, I'm talking about sustainable fishery, sustainable tourism. So this one have a two more direct influence for local communities and for people in general. We have others a little more indirect, e.g. climate change. It has been proven, for example, that coral reef can be part of a regulation, and seagrass and mangroves can be part of a regulation for climate change, absorbing quite a lot of CO2. We have also the role of coral reef to maintain the beach. They absorb part of the waves' energy, and they can maintain and protect the local stakeholders and villages and real estate from coastal erosion and extreme flood from extreme events. And I can continue a lot like this.
Thank you. We've only got about 10 minutes left, so we don't have time for another round of questions. So based on what you said, I'm going to throw out a question or two, and then we have a couple of questions from the audience, and we encourage the audience to send in more questions if they'd like. The question I have, I've heard the phrases impact investment, distribution, risk, private sector. So the question, and any of you can feel free to answer, is we have needs, we have people who are, marginalized, they're displaced, yet we have impact investors seeking profit. We want to do the most good, but those investments are not necessarily the most attractive investments. How do we, if you will, get the value right or the curves on the scale right so we can get those who really need help the finance that they need, yet also make it sufficiently attractive to the private sector investors? Anybody want to jump in? Tom, please.
I'll chime in quickly on that one. I think in this regard, Barry, I think this is where I think blended finance has such an important role to play. You're right to say that in many cases, it's hard to invest profitably in, let's say, rural enterprises, let's say in marine conservation, to give the blue finance example. In potentially it's hard to invest profitably in affordable housing. And therefore, what I think one of the solutions to that is the effective use of blended finance. So the marrying of public sources of capital, donor capital, and institutional capital. Now, that may not necessarily make the underlying enterprises that are the private sector enterprise more profitable. But what it can do is it can change the risk profile of an investment which is being made by the private sector. So a private investor, this is the logic of blended finance. The private sector investor, the institutional investor, will be more attracted because they will perceive the investment risk to be much lower, and therefore will be prepared to accept a lower return on their capital because some of the risk is offset by the public provider. Now, that doesn't necessarily, there are huge questions about the effectiveness of that and what the implications of that are, and there are broader questions about the nature of capital itself. But to address the specific question that you raised, I feel that blended finance is one of the tools in the box that can help the allocation of capital to the types of enterprise that you described.
Anyone else have any thoughts? Otherwise, I'll turn to some questions from the audience. Oh, Bilal, please.
Yes, hi. No, I just wanted to clarify, share with the rest of the people that it's, like I said, the risk appetites towards this charity sector has significantly decreased. There is no segregation to identify a humanitarian payment against a normal transaction payment. There are entities who are actually seeing this very lucrative, and financial service providers are partnering with other agencies, such as banks partnering with telcos to provide a solution for the humanitarian area, such as Facebook actually coming with a cryptocurrency by the name of Libra, which is supposed to reach out to the beneficiaries. There are areas, but I would agree there is a much bigger room for improvement for risk reduction, because it is a question mark of aid diversion, terrorist financing, and all the work that is done for humanitarian assistance to reaching out to the end beneficiary or the most marginalized people does create the aspect that not necessarily all of them would be able to fulfill the mandatory KYC or know your customer requirements that is required as a prerequisite for any financial service provider to work in. But there is a huge work being done in partnership to gain a lot of market share. Thanks.
Okay, yeah,
Nicola, please.
Thank you. Just last a quick one. I mean, I agree totally. And the blended finance for us is really the option when we're dealing with such an asset class different from the rest and doesn't have a clear, tangible revenue model. So for us, blended finance is really the option. I just want to punctualize that we are in the very beginning of blended finance, and we still have a lot of things to invent or create in terms of financial instruments to blend this finance. We have some major issues. Most of our impact investors, commercial investors, they're not patient enough for any of the conservation or livelihood enhancement project. Anything less than 8 years or 7 years is not going to work in the environmental or social field. And these investors, unfortunately, any fund today and you can ask all of them, of these banks and impact investors, family office, they all work with this 10-year a closed-end fund. And this is just a very, very basic way of working. So we still have to change some of the aspects. I'm very confident we're changing slowly but surely. So, but I think the blended finance is really what we have to push for, and we still have to think out of the box and create some new a new mechanism there. Thank you.
I have a question from the audience, since we have 5 minutes left, and any of you feel free to answer. And the question is I'll let you interpret it as you like. Is there a means to getting data transparency or real-time data transparency in the last mile of financing? And so talking about data transparency, getting it fast throughout the financing process. Anybody have any thoughts about that? Bilal?
Yeah,
please.
Okay, sorry, I wasn't sure because you were still on mute.
Yes.
Like I said, host-to-host solutions and systems that speak to the Treasury system, similar to what is currently Save the Children is collaborating in, where it will be creating the end-to-end transactions from not only the bank's end, the Treasury end, but also at the last mile, which has always been the hindrance of actually securing the identification and also safeguarding the use of the data of the beneficiaries that we are passing on to the third parties. That is one way of actually securing. There is an audit trail. Again, this is a component that can be achieved through the voucher system, but not necessarily when you speak about the physical cash element of it. In a perfect world, when systems speak to each other and when organizations sharing actual data and there is a clear visibility, there would be an end-to-end audit trail of every penny being spent. And thus my comment that the grace period to the charity sector is long gone. This is taxpayers' money, so everybody's asking about every single penny. The current collaboration, which is, like I referred to, Lotus 20, would be tapping into these kind of issues, including digital ID for those beneficiaries.
Anyone else? All right, then, since we've got 2 minutes left, I will wrap up. First, I'd like to thank the panelists for some really interesting answers and some really different ways at tackling the same problem, but we all seem to be centered around a few themes. If I can sum up, when people spoke about how do we get the finance to those who need it in terms particularly preventing as opposed to just reacting, it was about innovating, investing in capacity, finding local partners and local funding, impact measurement, having an audit trail, making solutions scalable, a commonality of approach, and understanding that risk appetite may be different for different partners. And then finally, of course, trying to achieve lasting impact. I'd like to thank everybody at the World Humanitarian Forum for sponsoring this panel. And those who have additional questions, of course, you can follow up through WHF, or you can probably find us on LinkedIn. And this session will be available online at the WHF Humanitarian Forum, which is the URL whf.london. And with that, thank you very much. Appreciate your attention. Thanks again to the panel. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.